Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique Shield and Mace and some of the more important principles, rules, theories, concepts, strategies, and history of this technique. So let's start out with the history. This history of this specific technique is a little bit more complex than some of our other techniques. So let's do this step by step. If you look at the original way this technique is done, you could go back to the 50s and the Iron Man tapes, and you can see it's done a very specific way. This is because it was done prior to Mr. Parker's innovations. It actually existed prior to Mr. Parker. The second way we think about this is the way it's done in Form 4. If you look at the way it's done in Form 4, it's done a very specific way. And then we can now take the third piece, which is the modern way in which we do this. So the way you want to think about it, the modern way, is it kind of fixes some of the stuff that's in those two prior ways of doing it, or does it differently? And let's get into that, because this brings up the concept of divisions of the art. We have three divisions of the art. The first one would be self-defense, what we're talking about in this video. The second would be freestyle. That's spontaneous motion and how you apply rules and principles through spontaneous motion. And the third being basics. Another way to think about it is the forms are part of the basics. They're called the moving basics. So why am I bringing up this concept? I'm doing it because different divisions have different objectives. So what do I mean by that? If you look at the forms, their objectives are adhering to themes and adhering to patterns, not rules and principles. If you look at self-defense and also freestyle to a certain degree, the objective is to implement self-defense through obeying rules, principles, and concepts. So let's put this in practice, and you can see how it actually affects the technique itself. So let's start out with the way it's done inside the form, because that is one-step timing. And what that means is, as he begins to do the punch, I'm going to establish my base, punch, and block all simultaneously with one another. So anybody that has any knowledge of Kenpo immediately will say, you haven't obeyed rule number one, which is establish your base. You're doing all three simultaneously with one another. Okay? And that's an issue. So why can Form 4 get away with it? Because, like we said earlier, its objective is to obey themes and patterns of the form, not self-defense. So let's move this into the old way, the self-defense technique way prior to Mr. Parker. And the way it's done, the way to think about that is it's two steps. You are actually slipping the punch, like we did previously, because that's part of its strategy. And then when now I've done that, now I do my block and my punch at the same time. There's a problem with that. Sure, I've implemented my strategy of slipping the punch, but what didn't I do? I didn't check off a loose extremity. We have a general rule that says we should check off loose extremities. So even though we were able to do this block and punch simultaneously, the beginning of that slip had some dangerous motions to it. So let's talk about the third way, or three steps that we've done here, and why they're there. So if you talk about the beginning part, what I'm doing is I'm checking off slipping and establishing my base all simultaneously with one another. The important part here is what's happening with this hand. I'm checking that off to make sure I'm safe. The part that most people don't realize also is what's going on here at the bottom. I'm also checking off a potential extremity of the leg, too, with my knee to their leg. So those things all happen at the same time. Now the next part of this would be to pick up that and keep that cover, but cock my hand at the same time, obeying the principle of economy motion. In other words, the way to think about it is do not make a cock a separate motion. And that's done through this motion. And then the third thing is, now that we've done all that, we can now do our punch and do our offense. Now, the important thing to think about here on this offense is how this punch is being done. It's important because it brings in a new concept of gauging. We're always trying to slip this punch. All three methods slip the punch, but with that slip, it could be done a variety of different ways. I could be gapping really far, which then leaves a big gap here, or I could be gapping very close and being right on my opponent. So how does that affect the punch? Well, keep in mind, punches have three ranges. The straight punch is the furthest range, the vertical is the middle, and the uppercut is the close. So based upon where I'm stepping here is which punch I'm going to do. As we do with a lot of our techniques, we always show you the long range. But keep in mind, that doesn't necessarily mean you always have to do the long range. What you need to do is read the situation and adapt to what the situation has. So in other words, You might have to do short, you might have to do middle, you might have to do long. Depends upon the situation that you're in. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's talk about the rest of the strategy. The first part of the strategy was to slip and then begin to counter. The second part of the strategy is that we're getting into the obscure zone so that we can hit the opponent without them seeing us. And the third part is to destabilize our opponent. Okay, so let's move to the rest of the pieces here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this right hand and we're going to be contouring down the body. We are not going to be losing contact with the opponent and trying to hit them on an angle of incidence. Instead, what we're going to be doing is contour and then a slight open-ended triangle here in order to hit them. So also keep in mind that we are going to be using the power principle of gravitational marriage. So that means alignment. So that means our leg, our arm, and our hand all have to be aligned. We do not want a chicken wing. Keep in mind, the general saying with Kenpo is alignments make backup mess possible, but they also make gravitational marriage possible because gravitational marriage is just backup mess done on a vertical and aiding with gravity. So now that we've done that, let's talk about what we're hitting here. We have three types of targets that we can hit. We have skeletal, which is bones, trying to break bones. We have nerves and muscles, which are different parts of the stuff that surrounds basically the skeletal. And then we have internal organs. So that means all the stuff that's inside your body, so to speak, or just organs in general, like eyes. Even the skin would be considered an organ. So in this case, what we're trying to do is we're trying to hit to the organs. We're trying to compress the internal organs in this case. So now that we've done that, and we've used this body English or settling in order to enhance the strike and the alignment, we're going to move on to continue this strategy of hitting them in obscure zones. So before we talk through that, let's talk through one little other concept that you may not have noticed here. From this punch, we're going to do this strike, but notice what happened in my left hand. If I did not bring this up, I would have been making that same problem I would have had earlier by doing it the old way. So what we're doing here is we're doing what's called a skip check. I'm skipping, checking here, and then we do it a second time at this point where we do the skip check. So in other words, we're obeying that rule of keeping a loose extremity under check. Okay? So now that we've done all that, let's talk through how we're going to about hitting this opponent. So keep in mind, the end part of the strategy is to destabilize the opponent. In this case, we're going to do it with both the hand and the foot, because anything you can do with your hand, you can do with your foot. But we're also going to be obeying that other concept of obscure. So why is that important here? Because there's two ways I could continue to come down to this opponent. I could come right from here and try and drop, but I'm not going to have proper path of travel. So what we want to do is cock the weapon to a certain degree and then hit them so that we have proper path of travel for our hand. So that brings in another concept. That concept is don't cross the center line without actually using something. So if I'm going to be cocking my hand, I don't want to come all the way around this opponent and then try and hit them without actually using it. And that's where this hit comes in. Now notice one thing that's going on here. I'm trying to get out of the way of this weapon because it's in my way to hit them. So that's what this left hand is for. We're going to start moving it out of the way so that we can begin to hit this opponent. If I didn't do that, I'm going to start disobeying the concept that's being employed here, the strategy. If I didn't do that, that means I have to come around the hand and try and hit this opponent on an angle of incidence. But guess what? I'm within his field of vision. We're disobeying what we thought our strategy was going to be. So how do we solve for that problem? The way we do that is we move the hand out of the way and then come up on the obscure zone, taking advantage of an open-ended triangle instead of trying to come on their line of sight. And then once we've done that, it's easier now to obey that idea of obscure zones. Okay, so now as we said earlier, I'm going to be doing a destabilization with the hand and with the foot. Keep in mind, that's just showing you that concept of what you can do with your hand, with your foot. You don't have to do that. I can come from here and just do it with my foot, or come to here and do it with my hand. The technique showing you the long version of the technique. You're not obligated to do the long version of the technique. You can do any version you want, again, based upon reading and how you want to execute this technique. Now, the one other thing to think about here is an objective of Kenpo. There are two major objectives of Kenpo: rounding off circles and rounding off corners and elongating circles. So in this case, what we're doing is we're elongating this circle to keep us in the obscure zone, rather than making a big circle which goes back into their line of sight. So let's go into this final destabilization piece. So we're using two concepts here, complementary angle, and complementary angle means you're following the line of this leg so that you can get away from the muscles of resistance here on the leg so that you can properly buckle it. The other one is open-ended triangle. If you look at the way it's done here, it's also done here with this strike. The way you think about an open-ended triangle is it's a part of the triangle with the bottom missing. So that's done here, and then it's replicated again with the foot and the kick here to complete that destabilization. Now, the final thing to think about here is what's happening. I could stay here, plant my foot, and then continue working on an opponent, but this technique does what some of the other techniques don't do. It actually removes you from the fight. So after the kick, it actually creates that distance and allows you to cross out and cover towards the opponent. So now that we've done that, let's walk through the technique fairly slow so that you can be executed. Up. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.